In 1930s Berlin, a young German woman marries into the Nazi regime to protect her father, becomes entangled in Himmler's pseudo-academic institute, where archaeology is weaponized to justify genocide, and must find her way from true believer to resistor in a world built on lies. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast, and today my guest is Elisabeth Storrs, author of Fables and Lies. Welcome to the Art and Fiction podcast, Elisabeth.
Well, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you. I'm all the way from Australia, so it's a long distance event. I'm
I
excited.
know. Yeah, well, it's Wednesday here and Thursday for you. So I'm very glad that we found a time that worked for both of us. Not easy to do.
Yes, that's right.
So your novel, Fables and Lies, which was wonderful, but it's a really unusual
Thank
World
you.
War II novel in that it's from the German point of view. So tell us about the genesis of the novel and the character of Freya.
Well, it's actually started off as a contemporary novel 30 years ago, uh, revealing my age. And I had become obsessed with Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Priam's gold in Troy. And it was this fabulous cache of gold that ended up, he smuggled it out of Turkey, took it to Berlin and bequeathed it to the German people. And it was in a Berlin museum. But I shouldn't do a spoiler, but it's a part of history. It disappeared for 50 years after the Russians stole it. And I became intrigued with that. And at the time I wrote the novel, the gold had not been discovered, but unfortunately, it was a mystery novel, and suddenly the Russians admitted that they had the gold. So I had to put it in the bottom drawer. But I write about Rome and Etruria. I did a trilogy, and then when I'd finished that, I returned back to Heinrich Schliemann and this gold, and actually looked into the real story, the true story behind how the gold was taken by the Russians in World War II. So I created this character, Freya, who works in the Museum of Pre and Early History, and she is called upon to assist to pack away the treasure in order to protect it from Allied air raids.
Yeah.
So that's how Freya came into about. But it's actually just going to be a novel about two women, the Russian woman coming through to steal it and the German woman trying to protect it. And it comes to the climax when they meet in the siege of Berlin. But I discovered in my research that the curator that actually ran that museum was a Nazi. And he was not only a Nazi, he was a member of Himmler's research institute, which was called the SS Ahnenerbe. And that led into an entirely more complex plot about the Ahnenerbe that was set up to basically twist history to serve power. And the archaeologists were called upon to say that the Aryan race, the master race, had arisen in the north, in Scandinavia and northern Germany. And therefore, when they invaded all the Eastern territories, they considered that they had already created civilization, that the Indo-Aryans were already in those areas, and therefore they were entitled to take the lands back.
I knew nothing about the Ahnenerbe conspiracy, although there were sort of echoes of Raiders of the Lost Ark in there, wasn't there?
Please.
Yeah.
Yes. So the bizarre thing is that Himmler believed in the occult, which
Yes.
actually means more esoteric beliefs than necessarily the witchcraft. But he believed in the Holy Grail. He believed in Atlantis. He sent scientists and to go and find a crystal skull in Bolivia. So Spielberg learned about these expeditions, and it was part of the inspiration for the Indiana. But behind the Atlantis myth was a very dangerous ideology because
Yes.
he sent this team to Tibet to find traces of the Proto-Indo-Aryans who had survived Atlantis. So they were going off to Tibet to find proof within the Tibetan people that there was enough markers in them to show that Atlantis had existed, and that again, the Proto-Aryans, that these amazing survivors of Atlantis were superhumans, and they again went across the world and they seeded every civilization.
Yeah.
I'll just warn people, there's a lot of Nazi vocabulary that I'll be using, which is offensive. Just a warning about that. So they said that they mated, they bred with these base races, these subhumans, and that's the reason why you don't see all of the Aryans across the world, because it was weakened.
It's just frightening. I mean, reading all of that stuff about their race ideology. So I just want to get back to Freya now, because I think what makes this novel so compelling is the character of Freya, this young woman who is a Nazi. She's brought up in that ethos, and she starts off, she's a patriot, she believes in Germany, she's one of them, so to speak. And we don't usually read novels about a person like that. Usually a war novel will start with someone who's already against the regime. Well, she was not. So that was very brave to
Yeah.
start that way. And of course, eventually, in the arc of her character, she does come to see what's this is not so good. Do you have any hesitation about writing from inside the regime like you did?
I did, and just part of my background, my father was what the Australians called a digger, and he fought in World War II, and he was severely wounded in Tobruk, which was in Africa, and that was by the Germans, by a German Stuka. That impacted him throughout his life. He was in 5 theatres of war. So I had great reservations about writing a book from the German viewpoint because of my dad.
Yeah.
He's now passed away, what he would think of that. But he wrote a memoir where he was an autodidact, and he wrote this amazing autobiography so that we could learn, his family could learn. But he did a summary in the beginning, which was so amazing. It encapsulated everything that was happening in the rise of Nazism. So I felt then that he understood that wider global phenomenon and what was driving the rise of the Nazis. And hopefully, because I expose how warped it is, that he wouldn't mind that I wrote this book. And I also was worried about spouting Nazi rhetoric because, unfortunately, in the current climate, fascism and neo-Nazi beliefs are flourishing. So I
Unfortunately.
didn't want to provide fodder for them to promulgate their beliefs. But the story is very much about Freya. She's a child of
Yes.
the Reich. She
Yeah.
has been educated in a Nazi system. There was no other system. The Nazis in 1933 sacked all the teachers that weren't Nazis. And so she is in a cocoon. She is not able to learn anything other
No.
than this uh, ideology. So she meets Darian Lessing, who is an archaeologist at the museum. He's German, but he's Cambridge educated. So he's an outsider, and he comes in and he opens her eyes to
Yes.
the rot beneath the regime, the weirdness of the beliefs, and she slowly comes around, and she actually starts her own small acts of resistance or defiance against the regime.
Because what is so frightening is that she really could be any of us. She was a good person, but she was brought up in a regime where, as you said, she didn't know any different. And I think that was one of the most frightening things about your novel, is that it was ordinary. There were ordinary people that this could be done to. How dangerous
Indoctrinated.
propaganda is, and how, of course, we are seeing this starting today. So, did you even realize when you were writing the novel how topical it was going to be?
Short answer, no. I
World
took
War
time to
II.
write this.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely knew there were parallels to what was happening in the world, but I had finished the novel and suddenly fascism was rising around our own world. And so I suddenly saw the novel as so relevant to what was happening today, and hopefully a warning to people to understand that they mustn't fall under this bubble of propaganda, the fake news. And why I felt that there were parallels was that Hitler didn't rise in a vacuum in
No, he did
Germany. There
not.
was a lot of preconditions, and the Germans had lost World War One. There were very, very harsh constraints placed on them after that. They couldn't have their army, but their industrial heartlands were taken by the French and also the Polish. And they had hyperinflation. So where money just meant nothing, it could literally triple overnight. You'd try and go and buy a loaf of bread, and suddenly the price had just risen incredibly. And then the Great Depression came. But one of the big sticking points for them is that you probably don't know, but Poland obviously was a country and with deep cultural roots. But for centuries, Russia and Germany actually carved it up between them. So
Yeah.
the Polish state did not exist. And so Germany believed they owned the areas of Poland that they lost under a Treaty of Versailles, and they called them the borderlands, and they really believed that they should get those territories back from the Poles. And they also then, when they decided to invade Russia and also take those territories. So the other kind of parallels to today, when we're talking about inflation, we're talking about people that are feeling as though they've been left behind. You get kind of parallels to what is happening in America, but there's also this rise of the right wing. Hitler used to say, "I will make Germany great again." That was actually one of. So he came in on this promises that he would assist veterans who had suffered in the Depression coming back. Their pensions ended up being worthless. He said he would take back the industrial heartlands. He would give unemployed youth, because unemployment was so vast, that he would give them jobs. And he would also get rid of all of the communists, all of the left-wing people. And so a lot of ordinary Germans, that appealed to them because they had been so downtrodden after World War One, and they actually had suffered, and so they fell for the rhetoric. They fell for it, and of course they voted him in. And you have to remember they were used to being under an emperor, a Kaiser, so that they were used to being in a monarchy. Like it was a democratic monarchy, but they were used to that Kaiserreich, and so I think that's one of the reasons why they weren't too averse to him coming in and trying to control it all. But then, of course, he came in and he just became so
It went
repressive.
sideways. But what
It
you've
went
done
sideways. Yeah,
in this novel is bring it down to a family. And the four people in the Brenner family are
exactly.
sort of four different types
They're a
that
microcosm. They're a microcosm.
yes,
Yeah,
thank you, that's a good word, the microcosm. So tell us a little bit about that. Of course, we have Freya,
yeah.
who so slowly gets her eyes open, but what about the other three?
Yes. So that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to take a family and give representation of the different beliefs within the regime of the populace. So their father, Conrad, he's a very devout Christian, and he actually is a member of the Confessing Church, which was a rebellious sect, a Protestant sect that secretly was opposing the regime. He's an ex-veteran, so he's handicapped, he's disabled, and he has every reason in the world to be bitter and follow Hitler in terms of the promises that he was giving. But he has this very strong moral compass. He doesn't believe in subhumans. He loves your fellow man. And so he is the moral compass that counters Freya's indoctrination. And so she is learning through him that there are certain beliefs you have to reject. And then you have Elsa, the mother, and she has really borne the brunt of World War One. She has had to go and work in a factory in order to feed the family while he's at war. He comes back and he's injured. She has to then continue in the factory. She really has suffered. I mean, the depression, people were very hungry. As you know, the world suffered in similar ways. So she really sees Hitler as the person that can make Germany great again. And but the thing you have to understand in terms of it was National Socialism. People go, oh, socialism, that's kind of left wing, but they were trying to help people, but they had to be good Germans. They had to be valuable Germans. So there were people of color, Jews,
No,
Slavs, that they didn't get welfare. They didn't get the
no.
benefit of this regime, but she does. And so she sees Hitler. So I guess she's kind of like a MAGA
Mhm.
person, can't see any wrong in him really. She's getting the benefits.
Okay,
And then
so,
there's
and then,
Fola,
yeah,
which
Vola.
is,
I loved your depiction of her because it was very realistic. Anyway, tell us more about Vola, the sister.
yes. So Elsie is kind of MAGA light, but
Yeah, Vola's full on.
Waller's the nothing, like he's the Messiah. He is the master race is what she wants to be part of. The reason why she's been more subjected to the indoctrination is that she's forced as well to go into a very actually Nazi enclave in Poland to work in a factory or to make money for the family. So she's taken away from the father's influence. So
Yeah,
she loses that influence. She's totally subjected to Nazi doctrine. And she actually ends up being in the Lebensborn movement, which was set up again by Himmler in order to breed good Aryans, valuable
yeah.
Germans. Of course, the women were all to be mothers and housewives, and the boys were to be soldiers. So she went into this breeding program, but she also, in a way, had privilege within it because her lover is an SS officer. She becomes privy or well party to a lot of dark things because the Lebensborn movement ended up in Poland kidnapping children.
Yeah,
Does that sound familiar to what's happening with Putin
yeah,
and Ukraine?
exactly.
He went in and kidnapped children. So those are the four people within family, and the interactions all happen between them.
Yeah, because following all four of them and how they all ended up, and no spoilers, was yeah, like a microcosm of the whole war, really. So in midst of all of this, you did manage to get some romance in, which I'm grateful for, and
Yes.
I think readers will be grateful for because it's kind of a dark novel. Let's face it. So why did you decide to introduce some romance with Darian and Freya?
Oh, because I love a love story, and I think
First,
everybody does. And well, I wanted to have the outsider come in and teach her. So there had to be a strong degree of affinity, there had to be proximity, and there had to be an ability to be attracted, I think, to what he was saying. And it ends up, she's also attracted to Darian, and he falls in love with her. And but it ends up being a thwarted love for some duration
quite a
of the
lot.
novel
Yeah.
because yeah, and what he suffers in the East, he gets sent to fight in Russia and Ukraine. He then comes back. I will tell you that's a spoiler, but he does come back, and he can tell her what is happening, the atrocities that are happening to the Jews and the Slavs in the East. So he's an
Yes.
important character to be someone that is the teacher, I guess, or provides the revelations to her. And I wanted a love story because that also touches the reader. I mean,
Yeah. It
it
does. It
becomes
really,
very real.
yeah. Well, I mean, the
Yeah.
best novels are about people, aren't they? And because that's what you really care about.
Yes.
Oh, and of course, Frodo, which we haven't mentioned because people haven't read the novel yet, is married to an SS officer who is an archaeologist. Yeah,
Yes.
he's a nasty bit of work, isn't he? So, how did you research that guy?
Well, his name's Casper. I brought him in just to give the framework because I wanted to introduce the Ahnenerbes, really dangerous research.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how I was going to reveal that because it was secret. So the only way thought I could do it was to marry her to this
Yeah.
SS officer who's part of the Ahnenerbe. But the reason why he wants to marry her is that he sees her as the perfect Aryan beauty, and he wants her to produce sons for him. And in the end, he actually traps her into marriage because he learns about Conrad's activities with the confessing church. So he basically says if she doesn't marry him, he's going to expose Conrad to the Gestapo.
her father.
And the other thing I was going to say is children were taught that they needed to inform on their parents if their parents showed anti-Nazi sentiment. She never informs on him. And then she actually puts her life in risk to protect him. So she's not completely indoctrinated. There is that chink that you get into that she does have integrity and a morality to her.
Well, I mean, right at the very beginning of the novel, Freya feels sorry for Dieter, the young boy who's beaten because he's listening
Yes,
to jazz. So she's already
yes.
starting to think, well, wait a minute, that's not right. So yeah, that works well because we have to root for her. We have to sympathize with her, right? Which of course
Exactly. I
we do.
mean, and that was a real challenge for me because I didn't want people to just reject her straight away because she is indoctrinated.
I'm going to focus next on Berlin. I have been to Berlin,
Ah,
and you really feel Berlin in this novel, and also just how destroyed it was because now it looks like probably it had looked, or part of it anyway. Like Museum Island is there, all the museums are back. So, did you go to Berlin as part of your research?
yes, yes,
Yeah, you must have.
yes, because I really wanted Berlin to become a character in
It
itself,
really does.
because
Yeah, very successfully.
yes. Yeah, so I hired a guide from the Humboldt University, who's a young student there, but a student of history. And he took me on a walking tour to the places I knew I wanted to see. So we did a general tour of Berlin, but he really honed in on the particular buildings, the museum that I wanted to look at. And what he taught me was that most of the names of the streets are not the names that were there in the regime. So
Okay.
I had to be very careful. And I found a map that actually had the different names of what it is today, what it was in Nazi Germany, and what it was in the GDR with the Soviet and the East
Yeah.
Germans. So they all change. And of course, the landscapes changed a lot as well. So the research had to go into what was actually there and then destroyed and what they replaced it with. If you want me to talk about the museum, the Priam History Museum,
Yeah.
I discovered that it was in the same street, Prince Albrechtstrasse. It's now Niederkircherstrasse. It
Mhm.
was in the same street as the Gestapo and the SS, and in fact,
Yes.
it was next door to the Gestapo headquarters.
What an
Uh,
interesting
so
find.
that Oh, yeah. And I didn't really know that. I didn't
Yeah.
understand that. I just said, oh, I want to see it was called Martin Gropius Bau is the building. And I wanted to see that. And then he comes along and now the SS House and Gestapo it's been completely razed, those buildings, and it's now a museum in itself called the Topography of Terrors. That in itself is fascinating to go and see the history there. But right next to this topography of terrors was this magnificent building that was built originally, purpose built to be the Museum of Decorative Arts. So if you ever get to Berlin, go and see it. It was bombed because, of course, it was
It
collateral
was
damage
pumped.
because trying to get the Gestapo headquarters, but it was built with all these decorations. Like it was built as a kind of a pretend, a faux Italian palazzo. That's the style, and it has these bas reliefs across it, which is all depictions of industrious craftsmen. So there's stonemasons and there's women spinning, and then they have plaques with famous decorative artists. But the most
Yeah.
magnificent thing is on the top floor are these Venetian majolica mosaics, and they depict 9 different epochs of art. So you've got Grecian, and you've got Oriental, medieval, Roman, etc. And they are glorious. They really are. And so they become part of my story as well.
So
Freya.
what amazes me is how much they rebuilt. Because towards
Yes,
the end of the
yes,
novel, you really understand just how much the people of Berlin suffered at the end of the war. The bombing, and of course, lots
yeah.
of places were bombed, but just how awful it was, and then the Russians coming in, and it was very vivid.
it was obliterated.
Yeah.
The Soviet artillery at the end really kind of was the icing on the cake. But what I discovered with all this bombing, and which is absurd, is
Mm.
that it's kind of like what Trump is doing in Iran now. So they thought that if they bombed a place, the people would rise up and overthrow the regime. You know, how you could do that is being bombed,
Yeah.
first of all.
Yeah.
And they would drop leaflets. Sometimes they'd drop leaflets and it would be saying, rise up, overthrow Hitler.
Yeah.
Of course, you were imprisoned if you picked them up, and there
Yeah.
was ended up being a death penalty if you picked them up and read them and spread them around. But what was also absurd was even though the Nazis were bad, they were the only government that Germany had. So the only
Yeah.
ones that were actually providing shelter to the homeless
Yeah.
and helping the wounded and
Yeah.
rebuilding infrastructure. So if they were overthrown, there would be a power vacuum.
Yeah.
And who were going to feed the people? In the meantime, the RAF did carpet bombing, and then the Americans did blockbuster
Yeah.
bombs, which would obliterate entire kind of almost suburbs.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. So when studying the German people, I looked at those that were victims, those that were complicit, and yeah, it was not simple. You couldn't treat them as a monolith. And in the end, they were not pro-regime, of course, because their world had been destroyed.
Just
Uh,
wanted to survive.
so yes, they just wanted to survive. There was actually a saying, I can't remember the German itself, but
Yeah.
they had a farewell and they would say survive. Instead of saying goodbye, they would say,
Yeah.
survive. That's how bad it became. And they did the same to Hamburg. And
And
right at the
Dresden.
end of the war, to Dresden. And Dresden
Yes.
had no strategic value at all. Berlin
Yeah.
actually had factories working within it, but
Yeah.
Dresden, just extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, it's the horrors of
So
war. So, would you like to do a short reading for Fables and Lies?
yes, you mentioned Dieter, that scene. So this is the very first chapter.
Oh,
Again,
good.
apologies for Nazi sentiment vocabulary.
Oh, that's fine. It's a
Berlin,
novel.
all
Oh,
right. Berlin, Thursday, 24th of August, 1939. Another day of perfect furor weather was fading. The Spree River was bathed in golden twilight. Freya cycled home beneath scarlet swastika banners hanging slack in the sultry air. Around her, Berliners enjoyed their evening entertainment. Lovers waltzed on open-air dance floors. Street-side cafes buzzed with chatter and laughter. Well-dressed couples strolled towards the theatre district, ready for an operetta or revue. Peddling past Artilleriestrasse's tapered buildings, Freya spied the new synagogue's ribbed gilded domes towering above the streetscape. She loved its exotic Moorish architecture. It was fortunate it had been saved from destruction in last November's violent pogrom. Many temples across the city weren't spared. Her family's Linienstrasse apartment block had seen better days. Formerly a fashionable townhouse at the turn of the century, the building had been converted into flats. The pale blue paint on the stonework was peeling, the white scroll pediments above the window frames sooty, the ornamental pilasters chipped. She inwardly groaned to see Gisela Vogelsang ensconced on the window seat of her ground floor apartment. With her hair dyed brassy red and eyebrows penciled in high arcs, the buxom woman was a nasty carbuncle. Her watery blue eyes observed all comings and goings. Ever since she and her husband moved into the Horowitz residence, the number of denunciations in the neighborhood had increased. Heil Hitler, Frau Wolfgang, Freya said, hurrying by. The woman raised her hefty arm in a perfect rigid diagonal. Heil Hitler, you've missed the excitement. Flock like a Steiger ensured the swing kid got his comeuppance today. Gestapo officers left a few minutes ago. Freya gasped. Dieter arrested? He's only 17. Gisela sneered. They just roughed him up, warned him to stop visiting secret jazz clubs to listen to dirty Negro music. I must get on, said Freya. She wheeled her bike through the street door, anxious to check on poor Dieter. The interior was stifling, the heat of the day yet to dissipate. In the dim vestibule, the youth was curled in a ball at the bottom of the stairs. His hulking grandfather, Ernst Weber, hovered over him. Jagged shards of jazz records lay scattered around them. Dieter's eyes were puffy slits, his cheek bruised. His hair was shorn roughly, the scalp bleeding. Freya hastened to Herr Weber as he tenderly lifted his dazed grandson in his immense arms. "We'll be fine, Fraulein," said the porter when he saw her, his face as grey as his hair. "I'll help you." He whispered, an edge to his tone. "Go. Steiger may still be watching." She resisted the urge to glance up to the next landing where Steiger, the officious party block warden, lived. The fact he was responsible for Dieter's punishment was no surprise. Other than the Voselsangs, most were wary of him. He kept files on dozens of households in the apartment blocks in the area. He revelled in persecuting the poor Horowitz family. Triumphant, he'd hounded them to emigrate to Amsterdam after Kristallnacht. Vati was scathing of him, a bully strutting around in a stormtrooper's uniform who'd been too young to see action in the war. Mutti was careful to keep on his good side, often baking an extra batch of gingerbread cakes for him. Freya reluctantly headed up the winding staircase, unnerved such punishment was exacted for a taste in music. Why was jazz forbidden? Swing music was appealing, with its lively notes and infectious beat. And the orphan Dieter was innocuous with his scruffy hair and open-neck shirts. His widowed grandfather doted on him, prepared to turn a blind eye to the harmless rebellion of the boy's music. She liked Dieter's pep, amused by him using American slang. "Okay, okay," he'd chirp, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Today, nothing was okay. Today, Dieter and his music had been silenced. The minims, crotchets, and quavers splintered within the black shellacke. Tomorrow, she would tell him not to let the Gestapo steal a tune from his head, rob the melody from his heart.
Oh, beautiful. That's a wonderful introduction. And that's our first look at Freya. So we see already, as I said earlier, we have some sympathy for her because she sympathizes with poor Dieter. I forgot that the Nazis didn't like jazz. That's interesting. I guess they found it
Yes,
subversive.
yes,
Yeah. My
yeah.
my husband's
And
a jazz musician, so it's like, wow.
yeah, well, yes, he would be in trouble.
Getting,
They didn't like, they called it degenerate art, the Impressionists.
oh yes,
They
absolutely. With
burned,
the
they burned,
Picasso
they
and well,
burned.
they had the degenerate art show actually. So, one of my goals with the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other artists. So, what's one thing you learned from writing this novel, which is very different from your first three novels, that you didn't know before?
I didn't know all about the Ahnenerbe, obviously, and I didn't understand the subversion of history that they could completely take a worldview. We call them Indo-Europeans. Actually, they actually originated in Ukraine. So, and civilization came in the east, rose in the east, not in the far north. So
Yes.
I never understood, I just never understood that ability to subvert history. I mean, I know history can be interpreted in different ways, but
Yes.
that's all very well. You can have different opinions and you can present them and publish articles about it, but this was actually weaponized. So I didn't realize that. And I also didn't understand the museums in Berlin. They were just magnificent. And
Yeah.
that's another place that I, of course, visited when I went to Berlin. So Museum Insel, it's Museum Island. It's
Mhm.
still there. They have
Yeah.
rebuilt those museums. Talking about the war crimes, the museums and the churches, they were all bombed and obliterated. So the Allies were doing basically what the Germans were bombing Coventry Cathedral. They were doing all those terrible things. And they just, I mean, they destroyed a lot of Russian palaces. And so I'm not excusing the Germans, but yeah, it was tragic to hear that these museums in Berlin had been attacked.
So,
Mm.
what are you working on now, if you'd like to share?
Yes, well, I'm still obsessed with Priam's gold, Priam's treasure. So I'm kind of going back to the first novel in terms of figuring out what the mystery was, what happened to that gold in Russia. And
Yeah.
I'm setting up a story where I trace the gold from its origin, so the goldsmith that made it in Troy, and then
Fun.
Schliemann discovering it in 1873, and then the Russian, they were called Trophy Brigade, they came through, they plundered as well. So that Trophy Brigade major that takes it back and hides it in Germany. And in between, in the 90s, I have Freya's granddaughter piecing together all of these pieces of history.
Okay. So is it going to be a triple time? Is
Yeah,
it
so
set in three different time periods?
it's actually four. Yeah, it'll be four actually because there'll
Wow,
be
that's
Bronze
going to
Age,
be
early
fun.
Bronze Age. Yeah, so I've already finished the Bronze Age part. So yeah, moving on to the others. For me, because I was so admired in the Roman Republic, I find it quite daunting going into other eras
Oh, I
now.
bet. Because
So
that's even earlier, isn't it, than
you're
what you were
familiar
used
with,
to?
yes. Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's early, way
way,
back,
way
way
earlier.
back.
Yeah, because your first
Yeah.
three novels were the Etruscans,
That's
weren't
right.
they?
Yes.
Yes, I remember
And
them well.
so fourth century BC, so in the early Roman Republic. And the Etruscans were this amazing civilization that lived mainly in Tuscany.
Yes.
So Carol,
I
all
know,
about
and I,
them. And
yeah,
yes, yeah. So
yeah,
and they ended up being destroyed by Rome. And so they're
yes.
a lost, in a way, a lost civilization. But archaeology is revealing more and more about them. Yeah.
So for this new novel, are you going to be traveling to Greece or what are you planning? Or have you?
Oh, I've been to Turkey and to Troy. So I've visited Troy. I can't see myself going to Russia, sadly. I
No, that's the
haven't
thing. You
been
won't be
to
able to do that.
Moscow.
Yeah.
No.
But
So it's basically, yeah, set in Turkey at Troy, and then it will be in Germany again with Schliemann bringing it
yeah.
back, and then Russia. I won't be able to walk the ground, as they say, but yeah,
No, no,
who
and you
knows?
won't be able to go and actually look at the treasure in the museum there.
No,
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 that's too bad.
sad. Yes. Who knows?
Well,
One day they may stop fighting.
it would be nice, wouldn't it? Yes. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for chatting with me today. We've just covered so much ground about your wonderful new novel, Fables and Lies.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.